Well, hello everybody. I hope you're keeping well. Today is Monday, the 24th of February. Now, I've been writing quite a lot of emails lately to my MP. That's what MPs are there for, whatever party they stand for, to serve us, not the other way round. And I decided after the last election that I was going to ensure that my MP worked hard. My MP is Polly Billington, who was parachuted in from London. She represents East Thanet, so Broadstairs, Ramsgate, part of Margate, that area. And at first, I wasn't that happy with responses. I wasn't getting many, and replies to emails such as the winter fuel allowance were not satisfactory. But that was then and this is now, and there's more Labour MPs who are prepared to drift away a little from the party line. Let's just put that out there. And I've probably got 3, 4, maybe 1 or 2 more emails still outstanding, but to her credit, she has been replying quite frequently since shortly before Christmas. Although still no reply to my 3-page email regarding the Bovaer, but from her response to the upcoming tax charges for farmers, maybe she shares some of my sentiments. She did oppose the Climate and Nature Bill, and she also opposed the snooping of bank accounts of the disabled as well. What I do like about her is that she doesn't just send you a 1-liner or 2 lines. She actually goes into whether she agrees or not and why she's reached that decision, what reservations she has. Although she does talk about supporting the Chancellor and the Prime Minister on things, that's of course part of her job to do that. Whether she actually believes that, though, is maybe quite another matter. There's still a lot of MPs who are afraid of having the whip removed from them for a variety of reasons. But Ms Billington used to be a reporter. So I will read what she said to me on the 19th of February, and I did send her an email back, and I will also read that. Dear Catherine Evans, thank you for contacting me about recent changes announced in the budget relating to inheritance tax reliefs for farmers. Farmers have faced a really tough time over the past 14 years, held back by a sluggish economy, botched trade deals, and a lack of public investment. Sky-high energy bills, rocketing borrowing costs, and broken public services are just some of the pressing issues the new government needs to tackle if we are to give farmers the stability and certainty they need to continue producing the food we all rely on. Well, that's quite eloquently put, but so far we haven't seen much evidence of things improving. Instead, everything seems to be taxed to the hilt. I do take on board that the Tory government that we had for the last 14 years were diabolical, and also preceding governments were little better. I remember the Labour government that went out 14, 15 years ago didn't even leave 1 penny in the coffers under Alistair Darling. Turning that situation around was always going to require tough choices, but I hope you can see from the Chancellor's recent budget that Labour is determined to end the era of austerity and fix the foundations of the country, ultimately tackling the black hole in the public finances left by the outgoing government, while also raising the funds needed to repair our crumbling hospitals, roads and schools has only been possible by raising taxes, including these changes to APR. But we don't really seem to see anything really beneficial from that at the moment. This £22 billion black hole has been added to with foreign aid and all manner of things, and we do have a problem with unchecked, unmitigated migration, and there's not enough schools, the hospitals are running really badly. It's the luck of the draw whether your council is keeping their head above water, because they have been running various vanity projects, many of them for decades, according to their brand of wokery. And what we need is boots on the ground, actual people at grassroots level, hospital wards properly funded with qualified staff. Instead, we get corridors full of people, and people sometimes hours in A&E and not getting treated, ambulances not arriving, even though taxes have gone up. There doesn't seem to be much evidence of any improvement, and we're now about 8 months in. But let's not be too harsh at this point. By doing so, the Chancellor has ensured we can invest more than £25 billion in our NHS, which is a bit of a toxic bird, £9 billion in schools, £5 billion on building new council homes, and hundreds of millions more for new transport projects, fixing potholes, job creation and economic growth projects, and recruiting 13,000 new police officers and PCSOs. All the while, the £22 billion black hole increases substantially. Where is this money coming from? Our pockets, the working people, ka-ching, ka-ching. Where are all the people with the fancy houses and the jet planes? Where are their contributions? I mean, I think last year or year before, Sir Rod Stewart dipped into his own pocket to pay for MRI scans for 32 people. Tracy Emin, locally here, has saved a lot of buildings that would otherwise have been bulldozed or left to rack and ruin, investing in things that the council should be doing. The council who empty the bins once a fortnight and are putting council tax up in April. That council. I have also seen reports in the mainstream media that the Met have not properly vetted 20,000 police officers. The checks have not been done. I think the excuse has been expedience, but you could have all sorts signing up as a police officer, and you don't exactly know what the true background is. That's quite dangerous when they're supposed to be there protecting the public. If they're unchecked, how can we be sure that we are safe on the streets? Because let's face it, incidents of crime, violent crime in particular, are ever increasing, it would seem. So Polly Billington continues. She has also been able to do so, spend this money, while sticking to her promise to protect the pay packets of working people by not raising income tax, employee national insurance, VAT and fuel duty. But of course, a while back, Sir Keir had his own version of what a working person actually is. And it doesn't help Granny down the road, who's probably shivering because a winter payment was taken off her for having £5 more savings than 6,000 in a bank account, and she has to do repairs to her rather dilapidated surroundings and can't afford to put the heating on. She's scared she won't have enough to pay for her funeral, which, if she's allowed to freeze to death, will come sooner rather than later. I believe it was right for the Chancellor to make changes to the inheritance tax reliefs currently afforded to farmers, given the situation that has been allowed to develop in recent years, where extremely wealthy people have been buying up huge swathes of farmland as a way to avoid inheritance tax. Is she talking about, say, somebody like Jeremy Clarkson? Those individuals' behaviour is not only costing the public purse lost revenue at the expense of our public services, but has also massively inflated the price of agriculture land at the expense of genuine farmers. Well, what about BlackRock then buying up swathes of land? And Bill Gates? Oh, but he's American, so he's probably exempt from paying taxes. We should be really worried about them. Also, intensive farmers, these factory farmers, there's all kinds of tax loopholes which won't affect them. This is about family farm tax, independent family farmers who've farmed the land for generations being penalised unfairly. This is what I'm talking about, not necessarily what Polly Billington is talking about. The changes the Chancellor has announced have closed that tax loophole while ensuring that the vast majority of farms will remain unaffected. Only the wealthiest 500 estates are likely to end up paying inheritance tax each year. Well, will Charlie Boy, will he be paying his taxes as a member of the royal family? What about that? These douchey people. He has a lot of independent farms working under the douchey, but he's a landowner, so will he be paying the taxes? She says farm owning couples will be able to pass on up to £3 million in assets without paying any inheritance tax. The change will also not come into effect until 2026. So we've still got time, folks, to do positive work on this to make sure it's overturned. Allowing those affected to prepare. Oh, we will prepare, all right. And the inheritance tax liability can also be paid in 10 annual instalments in most circumstances. Well, that's very kind, very charitable of them. But of course, will the HMRC in practice be quite so understanding? And if anybody isn't aware, HMRC will also charge interest. Believe you me, they will. So then people will end up having to pay quite a lot more on top of the tax they're supposed to pay. So in effect, they're being taxed twice. The tax on the inheritance and also interest, which is also a tax. And let's not forget VAT on things. According to HMRC data from 2021-2022, 3/4 of claims would not be affected by these APR changes, meaning they will continue to pay nothing. The largest assets, those worth over 2.5 million, related to just 7% of claims for APR. But you see, I don't just believe in statistics. It's like the HMRC saying that 95% of people do a tax return online, not on paper. I would beg to differ. It's a way of nudging people into behaving and doing things in a certain way. I still do mine on paper and always will. Nevertheless, I know the concern these changes have caused among the farming community, and I will continue to listen carefully to them and share those concerns with the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Steve Reed, to ensure he is aware of the specific issues they are raising. And I did, in fact, in my long email in December, ask her to speak with Steve Reed about the whole situation. I'm sure she's read my email several times and knows my exact position on things. I remain committed to supporting farmers and recognise that food security is national security. Well, that's good. Farmers and rural communities have been badly let down over the last 14 years. Oh, a lot longer than that. Which is why I was pleased to see the Chancellor announce the following measures at the autumn budget. $5 billion for the farming budget over 2 years, the biggest budget in our country's history for sustainable food production and nature. So what is sustainable food production? It's not traditional food production necessarily. Maybe it involves insects or crickets, or growing things in water rather than the land. Who knows? And we all know what the food agenda is. An attempt by the globalists to gradually phase out traditional farming, which has been carried out for tens of thousands of years, since the dawn of civilization, in fact. You see many an old drawing of the ancient Egyptians tilling and ploughing the land with their various contraptions. An immediate payout of $60 million through the Farming Recovery Fund to support farmers affected the flooding last winter. A commitment to $208 million in 2024-25 and 25-26 to improve biosecurity with stronger defences against diseases that threaten farming. A lot of us, though, are into natural farming methods and don't want to be using chemicals or things like Bovaer in the name of climate change. And I will say again about the HMRC and their figures. The other year when they tried to get everybody who was self-employed to do their tax returns online, and it just doesn't work for me. My brain isn't wired that way. More people than ever were asking for paper forms, which they couldn't refuse because that would be against, say, certain needs, disability or circumstances. So they couldn't do that. So they were absolutely snowed under, and they allowed people to pay a little bit late if they needed to as well. So that was people fighting back. And I made sure at the time that I got the message out there as well. So more probably did it by feeling of non-compliance, even if it's not something that they usually did. This comes alongside Labour's New Deal for Farmers, which will address low confidence and provide stability for the farming sector. This new deal will protect farmers from being undercut in trade deals, seeking a new veterinary agreement with the EU to cut red tape and get British food exports moving again, make the supply chain work more fairly, prevent shock rises in bills by switching on GB energy, better protect farmers from flooding through a new flood resilience task force, and use the government's own purchasing power to back British produce. But what about energy? Because we're sourcing 70% at least of our energy from overseas, and we're shutting down the last of our natural resource generators. So how are we going to produce the power if there's no sun and there's no wind then there's no wind or solar. So what are we going to do? How are we going to produce it? Oh dear. Now, it says there have undoubtedly been difficult decisions in the budget, but I hope you'll agree that the Chancellor has shown beyond doubt that Labour is taking the long-term decisions needed to fix the public finances, repair our broken public services and launch a decade of national renewal. So please rest assured that I'll continue to stand up for the stability and certainty farmers need to continue supporting our vital homegrown British food sector, including in Thanet. Thank you once again for contacting me about this important issue, and do not hesitate to get back in touch if there are any further points you would like to raise. Kind regards. Well, that's a mixed email. It's not totally negative, I don't think. However, a lot of farmland in Thanet has been sold off for housing developments. So how are we going to get that back? Recently, there was a buck roaming around in Manston. It had all been cleared for housing, so he didn't recognise any of his natural habitat. He was looking for a female to mate with, and he was roaming around for weeks, and somebody said, please somebody do something about the buck before he gets killed. So if all our farms are being built on, where are we going to grow that produce? How are we going to do it? Everything is becoming a housing estate. And what about the natural habitats and biodiversity? We need that for a good ecosystem. So if they're really that bothered about climate change and such, they should be protecting that ecosystem and that biodiversity. Anyway, it's not a totally negative email, and since Wednesday it has been announced that the government are going to encourage the NHS to buy at least 50% of British produce, and schools. I mean, schools and hospitals are full of processed food. There's people who are ill in hospital and being given ready meals which are full of sodium and saturates. And you've got the NHS banging on about blood pressure and cholesterol and how processed food is really bad for people, and yet that's what they're being fed in hospitals. And some food as well is not suitable. If, for example, you've got cancer, a lot of the foods that are on menus are maybe not digestible for people undergoing cancer treatment because their bellies often become very sensitive from the chemo and radiotherapy or whatever else they're taking. We need to see a return to a decent budget for those meals so that they can be produced in-house, that the kitchens are working properly again, and fresh seasonal produce is prepared in the hospitals and the schools like it used to be, rather than cheese sandwiches, pizza and various plant-based meals that people with sensitive tummies are not able to digest. My mum, for example, she spent many a time in hospital. She had a lot of health problems and she wasn't able to eat lentils and chickpeas. She had diverticulitis, among other things, and she just wasn't able to eat anything like that whatsoever, and seemed to exist on sandwiches and yogurt and things like sticky toffee pudding. And I used to take chocolate in for her because that's what she wanted. They used to try and get her to eat protein shakes, but they made her feel sick. They made her gag and she couldn't bear them. And she was so thin as well. Now, they don't really look at the individual, and they should do. This is what's wrong with healthcare in general, although that's not necessary for a food channel. But there we go. It'll be interesting to see anyway whether anything comes of that plan, because I did see on X that it's not going to be a mandatory requirement for hospitals and schools to do so. Maybe it's the government offering some kind of piecemeal attempt to pacify farmers and consumers that something is being done. But one wonders whether it's too little, too late. One wonders whether they're just offering something because they're afraid of the backlash, and they're hoping that by doing something or offering something, it will ease off backlash or potential backlash. And we need to see as well whether anything at all will come of it, or whether it's just sound bites. Anyway, I wrote in reply a very measured response. I could have been quite assertive or aggressive, but I think using my diplomatic skills, if you want to get somebody on your side, even if it's from a party that you don't wholly align with, your MP's there to work for you. I do think, unless things get really hairy, it's a good idea to try to be as reasonable as one can, while saying things that maybe, if that MP happens to be reasonably intelligent, shall we say, can read between the lines. And one would hope that a former hack would have a reasonable level of education and intelligence, although that's not always the case. But I will give people the benefit of the doubt. She can certainly write an email, and she can certainly communicate. And I do like to think that I'm a good communicator, but I'm also the kind of person who likes to try and get people on side. Everything in life is a game, and to play the game of life, one must participate in ways that one feels comfortable with, but nevertheless play the game. The idea is to get these representatives on our side. If we get their backs up, they're not going to do anything for us. And in fact, I wrote the other day about another issue, and she replied straight away, like within an hour. And that was to do with benefit money snooping. And she agreed that it wasn't a good idea to be going down that road. My reply: Dear Polly Billington, many thanks for your email, and I note its contents. Whilst I accept that tough decisions need to be made and to target the wealthy, many of the farmers potentially affected are not wealthy at all. The IHT threshold includes farm buildings and equipment in the inventory, and the fact is that a replacement tractor or combine harvester costs hundreds of thousands of pounds. And the farmhouse and outbuildings themselves may be worth the same, but need to be maintained, not to mention other running costs such as labour, animals and their feed, fertilisers, etc. And in fact, very little liquid asset, for example money in the bank, Therefore, the IHT will potentially affect even small family farmers and the descendants left without but a pot to piss in, so to speak. And I did say that. In fact, some of my Cumbrian farming family for many years have had to run other businesses alongside their farming activities just to keep afloat. With the IHT situation, the risk is that farmers and their loved ones may be forced to sell off all or parcels of their land for house building, which, as I'm sure you will understand, is sadly what has happened here in Thanet, which being an island merely protected by a seawall, because the Wonsum Channel is almost 2 miles wide and the water is regularly pumped out from a pumping station. I presume it's around about the Sandwich sewage works, but I'm not entirely sure, but I think that's probably where it is. It seems the most likely location. Sandwich was historically, theoretically, part of Thanet. Thanet, being an island, does not have the infrastructure in place to accommodate endless housing projects, as well as decimating natural habitats and biodiversities. Supermarkets, most of whom make huge profits, have not increased payments to farmers for over 10 years for the food they work hard to bring to our tables. And this profiteering is a huge problem, as is the fact that currently the UK is only producing around 30% of the food we eat, with up to 70% of our foodstuffs having to be imported, which will incur even higher food prices. We need to be producing more of our food as a nation, so we are more self-sufficient and less reliant on imports from other nations. A buoyant economy is characterised by a strong manufacturing base, which sadly has dwindled over decades. Farming is part of that manufacturing economy, and we should still be encouraging traditional farming alongside the new innovative techniques in order to keep food prices down whilst bringing us high quality meat and dairy and fresh seasonal produce, rather than penalising family farmers for working hard to feed the nation. Farming is a vocation, a heritage, a way of life passed down from generation to generation, and we run the risk of losing something that has been around for thousands of years and is part of our landscape. The point I was trying to put to her was the fact that we've got gross domestic product, which is the manufacturing, and we've lost steel plants, we've lost shipyards, we've lost all manner of industries that generate income. Meanwhile, we have an increase in service industry. So if you like service and welfare, you've got the NHS, schools, that's a service. You've got hospitality, those things are a service. And we've got this massive imbalance now, which is why the gross domestic product is coming down, plus the extra taxes that businesses are paying, and they're having to lay people off, so it's bringing our GDP down further. And farmers produce, so there again, they are crucial to our GDP, and more farming will hopefully start to increase our GDP, because it's going to cost us less importing food, and they're going to be able to do more local trade, more trade within the UK, and that means a more buoyant economy. One of the problems that we need to overcome is regulating and checking supermarkets and other large food businesses and producers such as Cadbury's, Nestle, and so on and so forth. If you haven't seen my Nestle video, I will put a link up at the end of this so you can watch it. Let's include Arla in there as well as one of these large industrial food producers. And inevitably, these producers, because they're large, there's lots of different tax loopholes. For example, if you do rebranding, I once worked for a law firm that did rebranding every 18 months to 2 years because there was always tax savings. Promises made in budgets are all very well and good, but we need to see those promises delivered. It's at the moment just buzzwords. They say what they're going to do, but we haven't seen any of it yet. Words are cheap. Actions speak volumes louder. I believe that the government needs to be held to account and actually deliver on those promises, or otherwise they are baseless. In the meantime, would the Chancellor not see fit to raise the IHT threshold by even $500,000, or else persuade supermarkets to increase the prices they pay to farmers to ensure that no farmer is left behind or forced to down tools and sell their land? Because farmers are producing a lot to supermarkets. Most people, the way of life, they don't think outside the box, and the first place they go to is the supermarkets. People aren't actually encouraged to shop directly with the farmer or other food producer, although more are starting to do that now, and we have wonderful online resources such as Full Fart Milk and foodfindershub.co.uk, which of course I'm an ambassador for. I appreciate the time you have taken to send me a lengthy response and the work you are doing to support farmers and the challenges they face. You have to do a little bit of buttering up. As an ambassador for farming and self-sufficiency, I genuinely look forward to seeing positive steps being made to nurture and grow our agricultural economy to ensure the health and nourishment of the nation. Yours sincerely. And hopefully she can read between the lines as well, having received a very long 3-page email, which may in places have been more like a gentle diatribe, shall we say. But that's it in a nutshell. As I said, several days later, I think it was yesterday, it was announced that the NHS and schools should be using at least 50% of UK produce. However, that's still not very high. I would say 70 or 80% would be better, but maybe things have to be done in stages. There's a lot of work to be done. I'm not going to shoot it down in flames. That's what I've written for now. I'm keeping my eye on the situation and watching things closely, and I dare say in the coming days or weeks I will be writing more emails to her about this and other subjects. Well, if you've got to the end of this, thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please, as usual, let me have your comments. What do you think? Was I robust enough? Should I have maybe squeezed the screws a little bit more perhaps? I think it was quite measured and diplomatic. I think maybe if things don't improve, then it's time to be a little more forceful. But as I said before, I think if you just go all guns blazing, you're not going to get very far with your MP. So please feel free to share and comment and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And I'll see you again soon for the next one. Bye for now.